Chile here with Sirius Stellus Moon, and I want to talk about the Chiron Aries conjunction because this is a very big wound happening right now. It's happening around the Rahu of NATO, and if I am to try to characterize this particular conjunction, um, if I take a look at what's happening with NATO, NATO is trying to sovereign up to the United States. Other countries are trying to sovereign up to NATO. Ukraine wants to be included in NATO and doesn't want to wait until it is included in NATO and wants to form an alternative to NATO group. United States wants NATO to pay up, but NATO wants to sovereign up, and then United States feels wounded about the bureaucratic delays that the European Union genuinely has around invoking Article 5. For example, Article 5 should have been invoked by the invasion to Ukraine way before Iran, even in 2014, if Ukraine was a full part of NATO. And so we have a lot of inclusivity would mean World War, and marginalizing is creating a situation where various people, various entities are marginalized by various decisions. And this is also the decan that has to do with the Venus Mars. Now, if I take a look at the astrology community, the Aries Chiron wound around the astrology community is, let's say Pfizer was an astrologer. So the entire astrological community, like many other sectors, is being targeted by the secret societies. And so to pay reverence or to include and be included, one will have to tackle this topic. And this topic is also affiliated with the Epsteins. To disinclude would mean that I'm going to talk about, let's say, the last decan of Aries without mentioning Austin Kopach that did the work on the decans, which is kind of weird. But I cannot talk about, let's say, Austin Kopach without talking about the person who is an occultist and ponder about how does the occult evolve from the type of occult that the Epstein ring used to traffic people. And so this decan of the Mars Venus is the act of separation from, but also the act of unionizing. Aries is the one that was disincluded or marginalized. But here's the thing, with the elite, to be included is to be marginalized. And to be excluded is also to be marginalized. Chiron Aries is the Epstein files being exposed. Othering is basically a part of the wounding. People are othered from themselves to get to be belonging to these type of groups. Chiron Aries, going back to the NATO example, Chiron Aries around Rao of NATO is United States venturing on to war with Iran, acting first, asking question later, and expecting the entire alliance to line up after withdrawing its participation and forces following the delay in the pay up of the 5%. On the one hand, Europe's sovereign up to the United States is a blessed, is something that, hey, paying more would also mean that NATO would buy from European weapon companies. That's how Europe saw it. um, Lilith here, it's also the Andromeda constellation, so Lilith. Aries here is also about being re-included, and then the expectation is for Aries to go with the society. It's kind of like, hey, we include you, but Aries is about social changes, and in Andromeda constellation is the social change of sacrificing to the sea monster, of human sacrificing. And this is the wound. Chiron Aries is kind of like, wait a second. Let's face the fact that somebody was marginalized because they wouldn't commit an act of human sacrifice to the sea monster. in order to get, let's say, real estate or have an ongoing business. And let's face the fact that the society cannot run business or real estate like that. And the fact that othering would be a life or death issue for a person. But Aries still rules societal change. Basically, with Aries Chiron, we're dealing with a society which participation in requires something that's intolerable, and stepping out of is also intolerable, or is made to be intolerable. If I take it to the alliance example, Ukraine, frustrated also, both United States and Ukraine are frustrated by how long it takes to the European Union to approve something as rules and regulations. Both these approvals would entail full-blown activation of Article 5. NATO is not included, but receives support almost as if it is included. United States is included, but feels like it's marginalized, where it's the one that's paying all the money, and then when it needs NATO to join Article 5, there are delays. Now, they haven't notified NATO. Or in terms of United States, it might be, yeah, we said we're going to war, then we go to war. But in terms of the European Union, the bureaucratic procedure takes time. Just like it doesn't, even when it calls to invoke Article 5, the strategy of response, when will the response be, and so on and so forth. And also, in the meantime of building that strategy, many things are adaptable, many things can change, including including the fact that the entire Article 5 would not need to be invoked eventually. Chiron Aries points at it points at the corruption within community that would cause. Now, usually the story for Aries is like Aries was the sister of Mars, and she did not have, how should I say that? She was not doing normal. But Aries Chiron here questions the normal. And indeed, when I think about the concept of the Trojan War, Aries had to become an infiltrator, but infiltrator in her own community. Okay? And she was, in order to think about it, in order to not be sacrificed, she had to cross as normal. But crossing as normal in her community would entail, and this is where the Trojan War basically sparks. If I think about the Chiron Aries Chiron, the moment next to my Mercury in my second house was, I was going to buy malachite bracelet, kind of like the chips one, kind of like the affordable version, and then there were missiles. So the store, it was before I arrived before the store opened, but the store was basically um, in front of a search, a rescue unit, an emergency rescue unit, and the note said, "Hey, if I'm not here, I'm there." And next to that emergency unit was something written that literally said Troy. I don't know how does that compound. And then I went to drink coffee because it was the time my internet package was weird. And then, um, so I was waiting for the store to open and having my coffee. Um, um, Now Malachite deals with psychosexual issues. More things to do with that. 444. The secret society's issue is exactly that, othering. It thrives on creating rigid boundaries between a dominant group and the perceived other, where the dominant group is basically those that are included by becoming a part of the perpetrators. And is used in political context to fuel prejudice against foreigners or minority groups. And now the question of being othered in a community that belonging is based on one's othering oneself from oneself. This sparks a Trojan War. Now, shifting from making quick judgmental othering assumptions to listening and seeking understanding. Now, here is the thing. When people still deal with sexual boundary violation, that interferes with exactly that process of communication. So the sexual boundary violation must be stopped for good so that people can. But what happens if a community bases itself on sexual boundary violation of one another? Awareness of language, unconscious biases, all of these things are basically not possible to practice as soon as people's sexual boundaries are not honored. And philosophically, there is the use of othering um, as basically, I think, kind of a Lacanian definition of I am me, I am not so and so. Think about the expression sheeple. think about not knowing that everything that presents itself as sex work is basically trafficking that is by extreme torture to loss of sense of self and mind control does to people that think that there is such thing as sex work. Because if sex work is work, then that will reach every profession, that they would torture astrologers and they would torture psychiatrists and they would torture psychologists and they would torture doctors and they would torture and then think about people justifying somebody being raped or harassed by calling them something to do with sex work or referring to something to do with promiscuity, which is in its extreme form a result of rape. And also the fact that these are topics that basically put the sense of self at risk, which means that this is a life or death issue. Aries also addresses the question of entitlement. Um, and while entitlement can be, let's say, how should I say that? While there definitely are contexts where entitlement can be negative, when it comes to sense of self, self-trust, dignity, and the basis for one's survival, that is no longer entitlement. That is entitlement that absolutely must be. Otherwise, there really is no way for society to exist as individuals within society and as society. A society of mind-controlled people is not a society. It's impossible to request Aries to use proper language when Aries is dealing with rape or astral rape. Now, when that is perpetual within a society, understanding is not something that there has to be a sense of self to have a conversation and mutual understanding. Now, when we consider the fact that certain technologies are and dark occult are doing that and the Epstein files are out, we can also see what's happening in NATO as some a possibility that absolutely can be is that various leaders are dealing with various astral rape or violations of certain kinds, and they can't say it, and it's very difficult to reach understandings within these frameworks. If NATO, after purchasing Palantir Technologies, goes to war and classified project unlocks certain components of that technology, entire NATO is now using actively something that commits crimes against humanity. I know Peter Thiel litigated certain, I think, intelligence agencies in the past for that. And then countries trying to evade war crimes can try to point at the flaws of now here is an example about the bureaucratic process of the European Union, in difference from, for example, from United States. United States has the Congress and so on and so forth. United States Federation and the European Union is not another America. It doesn't. So the Palantir deal that started at 2024 was completed at 2025 after about a year. And while it's in its final phases of being approved, suddenly the civil pensions of countries withdraw investments from Palantir. And then the banks join in. Now, at this time, we see, oh, NATO has acquired, but that deal was running for a year. So imagine activating Article 5. This is one weapon deal. Now, the more decisions, and with Aries, is such a slow moving planet. When Aries ingressed into Aries, we had the Great Depression. Neptune Saturn was the release of Epstein files on that degree in Aries. Now there's kind of like a Trojan War because certain people were sacrificed or targeted to be sacrificed. Now, if a person is targeted to be sacrificed, what are they going to do? They're going to start a Trojan War. If somebody's sexual boundaries are violated, even if it's something small, it already triggers all the survival coping mechanisms. With Aries Chiron, those include something that creates or now here's the thing: somebody starts a Trojan War, other people are marginalized. They start a Trojan War, so it's a chaos of Trojan Wars. This is what people said: the fight of all against all, and so on and so forth. And it also sparks the question of who is with who. Now, into that drama, Uranus is going to ingress to Gemini. Because the secret societies that operate by othering have a Trojan War within them. And um, and this is where the how should I say that? This is where the Trojan War of othering begins to coincide with an unprecedented Uranus in Gemini. Not because it trines Pluto. It always will make some aspect to Pluto, a minor or a major, because it conjoins Sedna. Now, I have the honor to have all of that on my Chiron. There are certain people that had Sedna Beta per se on their Chiron, or Uranus Beta per se on their Chiron. Now, here's the thing: if that's a natal Chiron, it doesn't move. So it's kind of like first Sedna goes there, and then Uranus. and the Chiron Geminis are like, why one after the other? Why not have Uranus and Sedna conjoining Chiron? Now, wherever Uranus goes, it tends to bring a fuck it type of attitude. Chiron Aries creates a situation where Uranus calls to say, oh, F it. And then it's like, oh, okay, okay, okay. That we can't do. And this is where the various Trojan war causes, um, how should I say that? Oh, this is another thing that this is not good for. We're not in Scorpio land. We are also not in Capricorn land. In fact, the last decan of Capricorn, which is the ability to delegate, the ability to good, to have good planning, foreseeing, is squaring Aries and Chiron. And Rahu of NATO. When I said what was underneath gloved hand gets caught red-handed, that's exactly that type of square. Um, if I think about the time of the ingress, that was when um, somebody that thought that certain thing. That's when my parent that told me take the pictures, put them into this, put them into that. Had to face the fact that I had to flee from that place, leaving everything there, including the pictures of me, my mom, my dad, and my dad, and the two dogs, and the two dogs, as an infant. Um, and more things. And the fact that we are not in Scorpio land and we're not in Capricorn land also means that our Scorpio strategies, good or bad, even Scorpio strategy that is kind of like completely benevolent. People are like, how come a Scorpio is completely benevolent? Yeah, they can be. Um, but even those have to deal with things interrupting. Because Scorpio is a fixed sign. And so this does not support any fixed strategy. I have my Mars in Scorpio, and pertaining a lot of things, I don't know what to do. And when it's a life or death issues, there are not many things where I can say, oh, I can adapt as I go. With the Capricorn, now the beginning of Capricorn Mars is trining the Aries Chiron. But squaring Neptune and Saturn. Mars squares Saturn. I was writing my thesis proposal during a Mars square Saturn, or during either during a Mars square Saturn or during having synastry with Mars square Saturn, which I think I also have with some of my colleagues. Um, and Mars square Saturn means, hey, we got to do something about that, but we don't quite know how to. And Saturn is like, wait a second, something has to be, we have to think through to our strategy. But Mars is kind of like, wait a second, we don't actually have time. This is where the innovative science is at odds with the conservative science. It's kind of like we don't really think about the time of COVID shots. People realize that, hey, the fifth vital sign is hurt. They lost some loved ones to something that the doctors seem to be delaying in understanding. Now, some of that delay is purely Saturnian. It's purely a person that studied science for so long that they try to go through, in order to shift the paradigm, they try to go through all the possible biases in their current methodology. This is how good doctors got duped by COVID. And if people are going to ask me, what about this guy? God says, what about this guy? Many people were targeted, yes, by the COVID itself. And if they are here, maybe they are even here in spite of the vaccines. And some of these are my colleagues too. We lost Nikola Stojanovic, supposedly to COVID. Um, Now, here's the thing. I knew Nikola Stojanovic only from his broadcasts on Lada Duncheva's channel. This is also where, if I think about the COVID times, people, by this delay, they began to realize that there are no doctors. Chiron was already in Aries. Um, what to do when there are no doctors? People try to go to grandmama's grandmama's recipes. Some of them might be particularly successful. Some of them, New methods of healing arise. If a day chart puts a Mars in Saturn sign, they might feel particularly invigorated but also able to endure. If I put a Mars in Saturn sign, depending on, but something that really accentuate on, let's say, Mars in Saturn, not a stellium in Saturn sign, then I would feel constricted, like it's an energy that harms my bones. It's kind of like, hey, I know I'm supposed to do something. I feel the urge to do something, but there is constriction about the action. For Saturnian energy, it might be an easier digestion of the energy of Mars. But here is the drama. It is rape culture that created the day and night sex division. One of the things that I experienced when I was recording last episode is that I saw there was basically I was experiencing an energy, and that energy, it felt to me like they were using a Mars in Capricorn talisman. And then when they were using that, I did not feel that constraint. It's kind of like I felt their energy and I was present with their energy. And I was like happy that they're using that, because I was like, oh, amazing, because then they can constrain their Mars in a way that they can experience as perhaps, I don't know, more attuned, or allowing them to think strategically or not be impulsive. Um, another Another placement that is challenging and challenged by this is where Jupiter turned retrograde, which is Procyon. And Procyon, when we think about Procyon, we think about abolishing apartheid, preventing a world war. Procyon is also the energy of being favored. And how being favored can be benefic, but also challenging. Think about the favored, um, the favored child that is actually, in Judaism, for example, they say that God's favorite are having the worst. Like the Job, for example, was God's favorite. So think about Jupiter in Procyon and how being favored in Judaism is different to being favored, I don't know, in another culture. And how that can be at odds with the Aries Chiron. Even think about Jupiter being religion, and kind of like the Jews being favored costed them a Holocaust. Or what did it mean to be included in Judaism during the Second World War? But also, what did it mean to be a Jewish woman in a situation where societal norms are bound to change, and one is bound to be a part of those changes in one of their personal placements. Jupiter Aries aspects um, can create various relations between one's philosophy and beliefs and societal changes. Um, both marginalizing and reincluding have a wound here. If I think about, let's say, the time where Pluto was in a Capricorn, there was, during the last phase of Capricorn, where it began to move towards what it does in Aquarius, um, this being disincluded from a certain group could have meant that when, let's just say, the secret societies took over that group as well, one was no longer affiliated with that group. Now, the drama about Pluto at the end of Capricorn was that there were certain groups that it was already not possible to be marginalized from without it being a survivalistic. And now, because it was going to ingress to Aquarius, it would be some sort of an underdog group. Think about astrology or the astrological community, and think about the people that reached astrology after they took a break from academia because of the Epstein. They took a break from each and every working sector because of the Epsteins. The sex trafficking industry took over the sex positive business sector. And then what was left? Well, what is these weird things that are happening? Oh, there's a place that talks about it, astrology and astrological magic. Well, at least they talk about these things. At least there they have a name. And then it was already not possible to be marginalized, but participation was tremendous trauma. Also, when we think about the Sex Work is Work campaign, that was 2 meters before the Israel-Palestine war.